Okay, I am going to tell you something about how these guys got started, but just before I get too excited about the book and the poets, I have to, because I might forget this bit. It's a beautiful book. Buy it, read it, get it for friends. I always forget that business end of things, and it's just such a wonderful book. So now I'm going to tell you how it happened. About 13 years ago, I think, I had a class, a poetry class over at homeschooling, and it was full of this lot, and there were some others, but 7 of them stayed together, and we used to hear stories about them. I saw some of them in subsequent years, but mostly I didn't, but I knew that they were still meeting. And they met for 12 years on the first Wednesday of every month except January. I did my sums and I forgot the January, and it was 144 get-togethers. So I can't remember what it is if you take the Januaries out, 132 or something. But that's commitment. And they must know each other pretty well and each other's work pretty well by now. So their ages ranged across 6 decades, and this and their varied approaches to writing led one of the members, I think it might have been Peter, to nickname them the Poets of Odd. And I think that this is the kind of attitude that artists have, especially poets in my experience. Instead of letting the differences get in the way, they respected each other, they respected each other's work, they learned from each other's approaches, and what always mattered was the writing. That kind of shared passion that they had made any other kind of differences really unimportant. Over the years, the group aged together, seeing each other through triumphs and griefs, illnesses, and life-changing events. But these weren't the things that were primary about their meetings. They became friends, sure, and I know that they have very special places in each other's hearts. But the meetings weren't social get-togethers, unlike some groups, writing groups that get together to have afternoon tea or whatever, and it forms a really important part of their lives. This was always about the poetry. Over the years, they each refined their writing skills, and for me, that was really obvious when I saw this book. For some of them, it was the first work that I'd seen for 12 years, and they've done well. And I'm proud, but I can't take any credit for that because they did it all by themselves. They also sharpened their critical skills, and this is really important in a writing group. From what I've been told, it wasn't the sort of group that expected pats on the back. Workshops were frank, advice was accepted, mostly. Stanzas were rearranged, lines dropped, and egos were left at the door. They knew that you don't get better by being told how good you already are. And that's what's made this group and this wonderful book really strong. They met at the pub across the road from homeschooling. As Norah put it, and I hope nobody's hearing, you must not mention this once you leave the room, the terrible Matthew Flinders, where they were always cold and always threatening to return the bad food, but which they nevertheless speak of with a kind of grudging affection. They were always the last ones to leave the pub, even though they weren't drinking. They were always treated kindly by curious waitresses who wondered what a bunch of poets could do together if they weren't drinking. And they probably outlasted all of those waitresses at Matthew Flinders because they're really regulars. Back across the street, back at homeschooling, I continued to teach poetry for another 12 years. That's 12 years of students, hundreds of students. Maybe that's why Barbara seems surprised that I remembered so much about their class. But I have to tell you, not all poetry classes are the same, and not all poetry students are the same. How could I ever forget the fun that Frances brought to her poems about animals, and just about everything, really. Just watching her walk through the door in her wonderful, colourful clothes was enough to brighten up a workshop. And while Frances loved animals, Patricia took an irreverent delight in stomping on sacred cows. She has continued that tradition, I see in the book. And how could I forget Norah's closely, sensitively observed small moments? They're the sort of moments that the world turns on. And they're beautiful. Or the delicate sensory feast of Barbara's poems. And I have to admit, when I think of feast and Barbara in the same sentence, I think of her scones too. She used to make great ones for class parties. Particular images that have stayed in my mind, and they're not actually poetic images, they're images of three poets themselves. First, Peter. I'll never forget the night. It was some kind of end of the year celebration, Times Glen, I think. I can't remember exactly what it was, but he stood on this darkened stage and he absolutely astounded everybody by singing to us lyrics that he'd written to a Dvorak melody in a voice as pure and clear as his snow poems in the book now. Then there was Nick. Nick sitting cross-legged on top of a classroom table, and he had a book opened like that, a great big book that he'd made. And he was reading his quirky, cryptic little poems to us as though he was in some kind of subversive episode of Play School. And finally, Kathy, and nobody could forget this, she'd written a poem, and I think we were working on performance, delivering your work to an audience. So she took us out to the cafeteria on a bright day and stood in front of the cafeteria with her page in her hand. And then, to our surprise, she got a lighter and lit the end of her page. And the deal was she had to finish reading the poem before it burned up. Sometime later we went to Montsalvat, and I had loved this performance that she'd done, and I'd suggested that she do it at Montsalvat, not realizing that they'd recently had a fire and lost several of the buildings. So, I don't know. They let us do it. I don't know how we evaded security, but perhaps it was a wonderful metaphor for that intoxicating mixture of poetry and danger. Anyway, it was fantastic. So you can see it's not the kind of class that a teacher forgets. And these were students for whom poetry was more than just another module in their diploma. And they've proven that. And okay, I've spoken about them. I'd like to say a few things about the book. It's, I spoke with Norah and Barbara about it, and they stressed that it was the product of shared labour. Everybody had a role. They exercised all their individual talents, from technical expertise to grandmotherly discipline to get the job done. And they've asked me to make sure I mention the wonderful assistance that they had from Janet Williams, a graphic designer in the Holmes Glen print room. They've stressed that for Janet nothing was too much trouble, and one of the reasons the anthology looks so gorgeous with its little scarlet petticoat is that she took care of them. The cat and the philosopher went for a walk. I knew as soon as I heard that was Nick's fault. It's a wonderful title, and it just makes you want to pick it up. It's as memorable and as varied as the poets that I've been talking about. It's full of surprises, from the richly textured memories of Barbara and Norah to Peter's mysterious lyrical narratives, from Patricia's seriously funny comedies of manners to Frances's preference for the wilder kingdoms of cats and spiders, from Kathy's powerful last lines to Nick's, which sneak up on you like some delightful illegal substance. In fact, this is a book which does those all-important last lines extremely well. It's full of poems that somehow keep going long after the words on the page have stopped. And to illustrate this, I thought I'd like, with Pat's permission, to read a poem that shows you what I mean. In this poem that I'm going to read, in a particularly twisted Patricia way, invites her son to a pre-funeral party in honor of his soon-to-be deceased father. Only Pat could get away with this. Invitation to a son. And I can't do it in her wonderful accent, so I'll have to do it in mine. A fling before the funeral day. That's what Mother wrote on the card. She then rang up to have her say, dealing with her as always, quite hard. If there is anything nice you perceive about your dad, then for God's sake, say it before it's too late. You'll have 60 seconds between soup and coffee. You'll go after Jane, but before Auntie Dottie. Marshal your thoughts, be quite sincere, stand up straight with accents clear. Funerals today are terribly boring. Nobody mentions the deceased went a-whoring. The children get up with horrible diction, spout stuff which to friends is pure drivel and fiction. Your father is dying, so don't wait till he's late. If it's true that you love him, please give him the news. You need not wear a tie, but could you manage some shoes? Poets themselves are going to read from the book, and before they do that, it gives me huge pleasure and pride. I'm so honoured to have been asked to do this, and I would like to declare The Cat and the Philosopher Went for a Walk officially launched.
This poem is about cats and philosophers. The cat and the philosopher went for a walk. The cat and the philosopher went for a walk beside the low stone wall, which ran the length of the apple orchard. One walked ahead, long tail up high, then curving down. The other walked with his head bowed, wondering where they were going and why. When they got there, one stretched out in the sun and promptly fell asleep. The other sat down in the shade and thought about where they had been and where they would go.
Right. This poem came about one day when I was thinking about my grandmother and her lovely house, and I loved her house and I loved my grandmother, and it's called Empty Room. In this darkened room where blinds were drawn against north wind whips of dust and blazing sun, or hearth fires were lit against biting barbs of hoarfrost, a family gathered, warm against a warring world. joy reached this room, mingled with the smell of cedar oil from polished chairs, embroidered cushions, faded roses, and grief. I slow and come to know this room again. The chime of the tired timepiece on the mantel, dripping seconds, awaiting the man with the key. Each night at 8 o'clock on the dot, he winds the clock, a lifeline for them both.
And my poems are about love and seasons, and this poem is called After Rereading Anna Karenina. I had a Vrodsky moment once. No ballroom, just a man, a woman, in a workplace elevator, rattling up to the 3rd floor, her with folded files tucked under one arm, he with a flashlight, a walkie-talkie. He smiles, she smiles, eyes meet, unmasked, just like that. He knows, she knows, the man, the woman, in a workplace elevator going up to the 3rd floor. He hands her his card, a clown drawn in black ink. 40 years later, she still has that card. What she didn't have was Anna's courage.
Hi, I wrote this poem actually about my late mother, and I guess it sort of reflects those images that stay with you, that will just suddenly come into your mind, and I'm sure we all have that at time. There are this sudden recognition of something in the past that stays with you, but then is gone again. But it's sort of intangible, but it's sort of somewhere in the mind. But anyway, this is that poem, that memory. It's called First Snow. I will always look for you in shimmering tinsel light from a shop window on Brodie Street. You enclosed me in the warmth of your black fur coat, and I wanted to stay hidden from the crisp, cooling air, staring into that glittering window for the whole of Christmas. Wait, you said. I held my breath, watched the sky change, and all around us a tumbling constellation. On your sleeve, a crystal flake perfection melting on the glossy pelt of your coat. The street a silent monastery, and words melted between us in delight at our first sight of snow. I will always look for you on Brodie Street. That light in your eyes, the hush of snowfall, and how you held your arms out to capture magic. I will always look for you on Brodie Street in shimmering tinsel light, and be reminded nothing lasts, not even your face in snow.
My name's Kathy, and my poems are about people and places, and I'm going to have a go at reciting this without looking, but if I do have to open the book, better on the right page, so I'll give it a go. This is called Pear-Shaped. I try to cut avocados your way, lay them on their sides and slit them in half, the way you would a person if you wanted to open them neatly, slicing shoulder, ribs, hip, thigh, calf in a smooth incision. I try not to cut a little flap, gouge out the slippery green with no thought for who'll be next. I try to leave the skin unripped, avoid leaving hillocks of pulp, be interested in your analysis of your own technique. But sometimes I forget.
As has been discussed, my poem is about one of our many family pets. In fact, it was the worst one. It's called Emma, Rest in Hell. Fat, spotty cattle dog, nasty glint in her eye, insane snarl of a grin, bearing yellow fangs. You never turned your back on her. Friend or foe, young or old, all were savaged. Religious door knockers were fair game. They tumbled downstairs backwards, Bibles flying heavenward. Emma slid under sofas to silently wait like a spider in a web, saliva drooling until the first juicy ankle plonked into view. After I was bitten, Mum said, "She only bites those who deserve to be bitten." A week later, Mum sported nasty purple puncture marks on her ankle. But the bitch was adored. "Love her or be disinherited," said my father. When she died, Mum handed Dad one of my abandoned trousseau nighties to use as a shroud for burial in the pet cemetery backyard. Distraught, he forced her front paws through the armholes of the flimsy garment, strawberries embroidered in pink thread on the bosom, and dressed her for her honeymoon with death. He'd better cover his ankles.
Thank you again, everyone, for coming. I'd just like to present these flowers to Kristen for launching the book tonight. If I could, everyone give her a round of applause, please. Yes, thank you again, everyone, for coming, and I think we'll draw to a close now, and everyone can just help themselves to drinks, and feel free to buy the books, or there's also lots of books here too, so enjoy the rest of the evening. Sorry, yes, yeah, books in the bookshop as well, so just enjoy the rest of the evening, and there's
you can sign the books.
and we can sign the books too.
Sorry for